Good day to you. This is Mr. Schmidt, and we're going to learn how to identify prepositional phrases. But first, some Vivaldi. I love that piece. That was Mari Silje Samuelson and the Trondheim soloists playing the third movement of Summer from Vivaldi's Four Seasons. Did you recognize it? What I love most about it is how those notes just crescendo again and again. She keeps starting on a low note and then rushing up the scale to a very high note that's a climax of intensity and volume. And you may not have known it, but in English, a prepositional phrase can have a similar effect. Let me show you how. I should say first that if you don't know your parts of speech yet, you'd better learn them, because I'm going to be referring to nouns, verbs, and adjectives throughout this video, and you have to know those things before you can learn about prepositions and prepositional phrases. I also want to introduce you to my favorite bee in the world. His name is Bartleby, and he will be here teaching us about prepositional phrases throughout the video. So here's a sentence about Bartleby. Early one morning, Bartleby the bee flew over the meadow to Madeline's garden. This sentence contains two prepositional phrases, over the meadow and to Madeline's garden. Now, if you've got your little handout on prepositional phrases from my website, you'll see that a prepositional phrase is supposed to start with a preposition and end with a noun that is the preposition's object. So you'll see on your list of prepositions, the word to is a preposition, the word over is a preposition, and here we have over what? Over the meadow. So meadow is the object of that preposition. We're going to call that an OP. And here we have to Madeline's garden. So garden is the object of this preposition too. So that's an OP. So two prepositional phrases, each one starts with a preposition, ends with a noun. That's what a prepositional phrase does. Now these are some awesome sentences from professional writers. I found these all in a great book by Don Kilgallen called Sentence Composing for High School Students. Why don't you just hit pause real quick and read these four sentences aloud to yourself and listen to see if you can tell where the prepositional phrases are. I'll just mark the first sentence for you. Here are some prepositional phrases. For me, with both, of his own arms, like a drowning man, against my stomach. I'm not going to mark the rest right now because we're going to come back to these sentences later. But do you see why each of these phrases is a prepositional phrase? It begins with the preposition for, with, of, like, against, and it ends with the noun that is that preposition's object, which I labeled OP, object of preposition. For me, with both, of his arms, like a man, against my stomach. So here they all are again, with a quick guilty hand, in a hole in the ground, across the ripples of a gentle sea. And do you hear the way that each of these phrases sort of crescendos and builds intensity from the beginning to the end? Listen to the rhythm of them. With both of his own arms, like a drowning man, with a quick guilty hand, in a hole in the ground, across the ripples of a gentle sea. Each one starts softer and gets louder and builds intensity over the course of the phrase. This is the rhythmic value of prepositional phrases. This is why we want to learn to use them, so we can write like Antonio Vivaldi. Now, so far you've been using your list of prepositions to find where the prepositional phrases are. You look at your list, it says to, around, toward, over, under, past. Those are prepositions, so that helps you find them. But I want you to be able to find them without using your list. So I'm going to teach you what a preposition actually is. Consider this sentence. The bee flew blank the flower. Any word that you could put in that blank right there is a preposition. To, around, toward, over. You could put any of them in that sentence. The bee flew to the flower, around the flower, toward the flower, over the flower, under the flower, past the flower. There are other prepositions, and I want to give you another sentence that is pretty good for testing whether a word is a preposition or not too. This sentence is, I studied blank the test. Fill in the blank. I studied until the test, before the test, after the test, for the test, despite the test. These are all prepositions. So you see, a preposition is really any word that defines a relationship between two things. Like a relationship of time. Mother called when? Before the movie started. That's a preposition. Or a relationship of place. Yesterday I found an old book. Where? Behind the shelf. That's a preposition. Direction. Bartleby the Blue flew from his hive to the garden. That word from, that's a preposition. Look at my typo here. Did you see that? That's supposed to have a T in it. Or a relationship of instrument, like using one thing for another. Lucy drove the nail with her new framing hammer. That word with is a preposition. So prepositions describe or define relationships between things. Okay, there I fixed the T in Bartleby. So here are some more sentences where we're going to find the prepositional phrases, and these all come from a great book called Simple Steps to Sentence Sense by Charlene Tess. In each sentence, I want you to enclose the prepositional phrase in square brackets and label each object of a preposition with OP. Let's do the first one together. At our house, everyone in the family does the dishes once a week. Now you probably recognize two prepositional phrases in that sentence, at our house and in the family. You probably notice that they both begin with the preposition at and in, and they both end with a noun, house and family. Now it's really important that you ask a good question when you're analyzing where your prepositional phrases are. And the question is, preposition what? At what? At our house. So the word house is the OP. The OP always answers the question, preposition what? In what? In the family. OP. So you want to put brackets around the prepositional phrase, preposition all the way to the object, the noun that answers the question in what, and then write OP over the object. Do the rest of them yourself and then check your answers. Hit pause right now. So here are my answers. At our house, in the family, in the cool, of the morning, etc. Check them against yours, and then make sure that you put OP over each of the objects of prepositions. Now I'm going to make a prediction here that a couple of these may have given you some trouble, and those are along the narrow trail and around the dinosaur display. If you put around the dinosaur or along the narrow, what you're doing is you're forgetting to go all the way to the noun that answers the question along what, around what. We didn't walk around the dinosaur, we walked around the dinosaur display. It was a bunch of dinosaurs in a big display. So make sure you identify your objects of prepositions right. You may also have been confused by this one in French and Spanish. You may have been confused by the fact that there can be more than one object for the same preposition, because she wrote in French and also in Spanish. So make sure you've got both OPs identified in that one. So here are 5 more sentences, and I want you to hit pause again, use your worksheet, enclose all the prepositional phrases in square brackets, and label each object of a preposition OP. See how you do. So again, here are the answers. Make sure you check yours against mine, and make sure you're identifying your objects correctly. That will be a very important skill later on. Now let's go back and look at some sentences we had earlier in the lesson. These are all from professional writers, Stephen King, J.R.R. Tolkien, people like that. And they are full of prepositional phrases, but there are actually a couple of places in these sentences where something looks like a prepositional phrase and isn't. So I want you to look at them again and find a place where a preposition is used, or a word that's usually a preposition, is used, but it is not used in a prepositional phrase. Hit pause and see if you can find them. Did you see them? To sob and to hide. What's different between to sob and to hide and all these other prepositional phrases like in a hole, in the ground? If you figured out that the reason is that hide is a verb and sob is a verb, then you're right. These are actually called infinitive phrases. To sob. To plus a verb is an infinitive phrase. So a prepositional phrase, remember, has an object of the preposition that is a noun. So you can't say to what, to face, or something like that. That doesn't make sense. It's actually to hide. To plus a verb. So these are infinitive phrases, not prepositional phrases. So you have to watch out between prepositional phrases and infinitive phrases. Make sure you're distinguishing them correctly. A prepositional phrase, Claire took the bus to the mall. To the mall. To plus a noun, mall. An infinitive phrase, I never meant to offend you. To offend, that's an infinitive. So to offend you is an infinitive phrase. Take a look at that sentence underneath where it says after the policy session. Identify where the prepositional phrases are, and identify if there are any infinitive phrases. So hit pause, do the work, mark it up, and then come back to check your work. Okay, so here are the answers. After the policy session, and despite public disapproval, those are both prepositional phrases. But this one here, to raise taxes, that's a to plus a verb. That's an infinitive phrase. And we're going to learn about that later, so don't misidentify that as a prepositional phrase. Again, I highly recommend that you get Don Kilgallen's book, Sentence Composing for High School. It's full of great examples of how to use prepositional phrases, like this one from James Baldwin. Across the street from the house, in an empty lot between 2 houses, stood the rock pile. Did you hear the rhythm, the cadence, the build-up to the climax that mimics that Vivaldi concerto we heard before? That's the kind of sentence you want to be writing. And if you get really good at using prepositional phrases, you'll be able to write like Antonio Vivaldi. I also recommend teachers and students check out Charlene Tess's excellent Simple Steps to Sentence Sense, which will be very helpful for sentence analysis. Again, this has been Mr. Schmidt teaching you how to identify prepositional phrases. Your next steps could be identifying verbs and verb phrases. That's the next step in sentence analysis. Or if you're really good at sentence analysis already and you want to get to work learning how to write, you might jump straight ahead to using prepositional phrases. As always, I want to remind you to keep studying because, in the immortal words of Alexander Pope, a little learning is a dangerous thing. We all have a lot of learning to do before we can write like Antonio Vivaldi.